Hello, everybody. I'm so happy to have my dear friend Sandy with me today. We haven't had a conversation recorded like this in a while, but we are kindred spirits and we love talking about anything and everything together. And I always love hearing her perspective. And I will say you're also an incredibly articulate and beautiful writer. So I always love hearing your thoughts and the way you say them. It's just always very inspiring to me. So yeah, I'm so grateful to have you here today, Sandy. And we are going to talk about a little bit of everything, but I think my thought was to talk about some of the stuff that has come up in season two with philosophizing your life. How does that relate to marriage? How does that relate to again, if it's about philosophizing your life, how does that relate to structuring your time, or like how you go about creating structures in your family, or like how is that related to philosophy, or is it not? And then another thought that I had brought up to Sandy to talk about was this distinction between um, being held hostage to emotions versus being hospitable toward emotions. I think there's a lot of kind of confusion out there today related to emotions. And then we also have our own inherent experiences with them as children and how our parents handled those things. And then realize, like thinking, well, maybe, now we live in a pluralistic age, though. So the way our parents maybe did things is sometimes challenged by mainstream conversation. And also, people will just say, well, that worked for you, but this worked for me, kind of thing. And I think there can be a fear of like ultra relativism in that area. However, if we go back to like what is something that really does speak to the truth of the matter, like what actually functions. I guess I'm curious in that always. It's like I understand there's many experiences and we can validate that, but we can also try to get to the underlying of like what is ultimately probably the most optimal, right, for let's say dealing with emotional challenges or the nexus of emotions that we often feel and experience in family dynamics because we're both mothers. So anyway, those are some of the things that it's a broad sweep there, but there's a lot that I wanted to sort of just pick your brain about and talk to you about. But is there something in all that I just said that's like alive for you, Sandy, or something you'd like to sort of start with?
First of all, thank you so much for having me back on OG Rose. I know it's been eons since we've gotten together, and I'm so glad to be here. You always inspire my best work, Michelle. So thanks for having
Thank
me.
you.
And I mean, you've opened up so many questions just now, as you always do with all of your wonderful ideas and thoughts. And I think the whole philosophizing your life is such an essential part that we as humans need to entertain, but don't do as much. Or perhaps we do it impassively and don't acknowledge that we're philosophizing, because in the end of the day, the way you live your life is the art that you create. So there is that. And I think I've always said this, perhaps in our previous talks and conversations, both online and in person, that we tend to not sit with our thoughts as much. We live in our heads, but we
Mm-hmm.
don't address the thoughts in our heads with the same conscientiousness that we need to.
Mm-hmm.
We are, and I think it also relates to the whole hostage and hospitable and being a host. Are we held hostage in our minds in our efforts to be hospitable? That is
Mm-hmm.
something that I think is very interesting because, and I mean, even if you look at just the word, host means to entertain or to hold or to carry. And I mean, that's initially what the Latin definition is. But in hosting and in being hostage, I think there is a clear difference. It's
Mm-hmm.
not, it's rather the distance and not just the disposition of it. And in our daily lives, when we're trying to philosophize it and to form schedules or patterns or to know a routine that
Yeah.
works
Yeah.
for your structure of family, I think those two things come into play.
Mm-hmm.
Hosting, being the host of your family, for example, as mothers, we are the main primary caretaker, but we also host the home because we make it hospitable.
Mm-hmm.
Having said that, there is a lot of emotion and thought that goes into that. So are we sometimes, I mean, I think we are. I mean, I don't think it's a rhetorical question, but I think most of the time we can be held hostage by the emotions or the intensity, by the enormity of all of it. And I think that's a clear sort of representation of the word play, that there is host and hostage. And
Exactly.
they go so hand in hand. And
Mm-hmm.
not to just compare it to motherhood, but I think it is so, so important because one welcomes and the other captures, and
Yeah.
motherhood directly stands in that tension. There is both in it, and it is perspective. So I think that's where I am right now. So I'll let you steer it forward.
Yeah, I love that, Sandy. And I like that you showed and went in that direction of showing that the reason why I'm interested in wordplay, at least, or like word connection association, is because it reveals how there's often a bothness at play. You know, these words are so really so similar, right? And like, you know, I think I told you in an audio message that I was just, I don't know, doing the dishes and suddenly I was like, that's odd. You know, it's so wild how the word hostage is so close to hosting, and yet they're a completely different vibe, a completely different meaning. We get a completely different emotional reaction to those words, and yet they are very much related. I mean, there's a part of me that wonders if it just boils down to um, kind of the Nietzschean concept of like limiting yourself, where like you find your freedom in that choice to do a type of hosting as a way of being, like in the sense that you could think, this is the thing, the mind is so powerful, where you could always see yourself as a hostage in that, right? Oh, I'm let's just, for lack of a better word, reduce it to like, oh, I'm a stay-at-home mom, I have to run the home, I'm a homemaker. Well, actually, the term homemaker has faded out over the years. I think it should be like redeemed in many respects, because being, you are a maker, you are a creator. It's a very powerful role. Actually, it's not merely a submissive role. Yes, it may come in the context of hierarchy, in the sense of just order, right? However, it's still an incredibly powerful role. It's an incredibly powerful position. And, you think about it, like the mother was the one going to be holding down the fort to, say if men were going to go off to hunt or go off to war, whatever it is. I mean, mother was holding down the fort for that to occur. And so this is actually quite a powerful position. But if you only see it in terms of a hostage situation, then you lose the ability to understand the power of your ability to host, the power of your ability to um, be the space maker, right? And the person who does facilitate life and the abundance of it and the growth of it. And so, yes, in a sense, yeah, you choose to be a hostage to your hosting still. However, you can find a sense of freedom in that choice. So yeah, I guess it does make me think a little bit about, like, again, Nietzsche's limiting, like the limitations, and then how that often creates value. And also, if we think about like Hegel and in the absolute choice, this is kind of an absolute choice to choose to see something that could be considered and construed by society as being hostage, to being like, no, I chose this and this is my power. This is my power to be a host and to be hospitable, right? And that, I always think hospitable is interesting, right? Because it has that connotation of hospital or healing and being patient. And patience is such a big thing that we have to cultivate in motherhood, and patience with ourselves, patience with our thoughts. Because so yeah, that's what the direction I'll go. And then I want to touch on one other thing that you were saying about how we are with our own thoughts. And I love that. And it's funny, like over the years of our conversations, it's funny how things land in one way, and then through certain experiences, they land differently. Like, recently I've been reading Julia Cameron's book, the Artist Way. Sorry, I always forget the title, The Artist Way. It's very good. And she talks about doing a practice called the morning pages, which is basically just journaling in the morning. And apparently, I only really confronted this in myself when I started to try and, but not try. I've been implementing the practice now, as motherhood goes. Like sometimes I'm doing it with children around, but I try to make myself do it because it's been really, really helpful for me. Like it's been very transformative, something so simple, and yet it can be so transformative. But I realized that I think a lot of years I had a judgment toward journaling, like, oh, I guess that's for some people, or I don't really know how to categorize that type of writing, so it's not really honing your craft to journal. I feel it's a regrettable sentiment that I had toward journaling, but really it's like, wow, no, this is just you allowing yourself to sit with your, like, to see your thoughts come out of your head and put on paper, and to not have those thoughts be continually ruminating in your head or then projected on other people. It's like you're owning your thoughts, you're putting them down, whether it's what you're worried about, what you have to do, the fact that you need to start breath, like you just, her thought is just right, literally free associational writing, whether it's something that looks really nice in the end of it or not. Like you're not supposed to really judge it, you just take it for what it is. And this process of sitting with your thoughts and being a bit more, yeah, just having a little practice where you do this every day can make such a massive difference, where you're, again, starting to own your own self. your own selfhood, and how much when you don't, like the days I don't do it or haven't gotten around to it, I feel a difference. Like I do see myself starting to project and kind of reach out for, I don't know, almost like this concept of feeling my own self or understanding my own self by projecting on others, whether it's, my husband or my children or those around me. It's like, instead of just coming within to myself and realizing that I actually have that power here to be able to meet the things that I need to meet and also to articulate with clear communication what is required, what is necessary, like we're talking about with creating structures in your home or whatever it is. And so it's been a powerful thing. And I think to myself, like, wow, yes, this ability to be hospitable with your thoughts instead of being held hostage by your thoughts, which I think a lot of moderns are, because it's all this up here. It's a lot of just, messaging with other people, consuming via scrolling. But in terms of really, like, have you ever asked yourself, how do you define love? Have you ever asked yourself, how do you define success? Like these very simple questions, and yet we may not even know ourselves because we've never even taken the time to sit down with a pen and paper and like write down those thoughts or acknowledge what things are coming to our head. Anyway, I'm blown away by the practice, and just, it's so simple and rudimentary. And some people have probably been doing this for years and like, yeah, it's great. Most they'd recommend it. But yeah, I don't know. It just was really, I wanted to share that because, I think we've also sort of discussed just evolving as women, as mothers, and I wanted to share that because it's been a part of that evolution process for me. So yeah, and it spoke to the thoughts concept. So yeah.
I think it's really interesting how you sort of pick up, it could just be a conventional, very mundane, not like life altering hobby or a task or something different that you pick up to do and you integrate it into your daily life. And you're profoundly baffled because you're like, wow, this has such a great impact. I
Yeah.
think it's also, I mean, this whole notion about being able to journal is to be able to see your abstract thoughts in words, like in front of you, the very physicality of it literally being there in front of you. It makes me think about Chesterton and the paradox of like domestic greatness, because he talks about how domestic life is called confinement, but actually he calls it cosmic. Because if you're in a nursery with your child, you're not just trapped or imprisoned, you're actually governing and nurturing, human formation. You're teaching another person to be a human being and how to be. And I think one of the many things that, one of the many challenges of motherhood that we tend to unfortunately see as being imprisoned or held hostage is our inability to acknowledge that moment as we grow together. It is a parallel way of being. I may have been a mother more than once, but I have not been a mother to you. And every day in nurturing you, I'm also nurturing myself because I'm navigating who you are and how you are going to be human.
Yes.
And I think with journaling, just to bring it back to that point, when you are able to set the tone for yourself that this is what's up there today, these are my muddled thoughts.
Yes.
But actually, if you look at it physically, you're able to make sense of it. Like, okay, I'm not actually losing my marbles. This makes sense. I can actually perhaps today, my day is going to be about what I just wrote about, or rather, oh, okay, so this is how I really feel. And, sometimes when you talk about things, if you say it out loud, I mean, verbal processing is a real thing, right? I mean, some people process things verbally. And I think journaling is also a way of processing. I mean, to set the tone to the day. I mean, it depends what you journal, and that's obviously very personal and intimate. You could journal your task list, you could journal how you're feeling, you could journal the goals you've set for the day, for the week, or the goals you've set for a particular child, or your family, or your husband and yourself, or like what you hope to achieve today. And I think that really helps you to host your day in a way where you're expanding and not being trapped, because you are growing in your thought, which allows you to grow more than you did yesterday. And I think life is mostly that. And that's why we philosophize and read and communicate and have conversations to nurture our mind to physically grow, which is very interesting, which is what we do in motherhood too. We physically, mentally, nurture and grow these little human beings to be able to regulate their emotions. And I always find it very interesting. We focus so much on being able to regulate children's habits, their aggression, their tantrums. their feelings, their emotions. We forget to do that to ourselves. Although we do acknowledge it in the moment, we're like, okay, I really wish I could roll on the floor and cry the way you are right now. But like, I wish we would pause in that moment and realize that, oh, maybe we can both cultivate habits where
Yeah.
I can be better at regulating my own mind and my own emotions while raising you. And then that way, you are not imprisoned. You've been entrusted by motherhood. You're not a hostage. You've not been
Absolutely.
captivated by the bad moments. You've rather, and I'm not saying we have to always glamorize or romanticize being a mother or parenting, because it's not always very pretty. And the two things can be true at once.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
because it's a lifelong process, because you don't ever stop being a parent,
Yeah.
it's one, or a wife, or a husband, or a
Yeah.
father. You never stop being those people as you don't stop being a physical human. And so to
Yeah.
show up for those everlasting relationships, you need to cultivate those habits every day. And I always say, you passingly made this example of what is love. And I have always
Mm.
said, at least between me and my husband, that love is a practice. It's not a habit, because it
Mm-hmm.
needs to be cultivated in different
Wow.
seasons of life, because we
Mm.
are always evolving every year,
Mm.
every day,
Mm.
every experience, children, life, loss, grief, all those things
Mm-hmm.
change your outlook and your approach towards your marriage, to the way you parent, to the way you look at your life. So I think most of it, again, journaling is a practice. You do it every day and then
Yeah.
it becomes a habit, but it
Yeah.
needs to be done quite often for it to be a habit.
Mm.
So I think just being able to practice those things, it's really
Mm.
important. And I think that's what philosophizing life is, to be able to
Mm.
acknowledge the good and the bad and the true and the beautiful in the
Mm.
moment. And that's
Mm.
how you sort of philosophize your life, because you are intentionally present. And you and I have done a talk about being human and human being, and we've done the word play there too. And I really, really think, just when it comes to philosophizing life, it's mostly about perspective. Obviously, that's stating the obvious, right? But
Yeah.
I think it's also being intentional about cultivating your perspective every day.
Mm.
It's not
Mm-hmm.
just given,
Mm.
it's not permanent, it's not absolute. And
Yeah.
if you have that sort of approach of it being absolute, oh, I am absolutely trapped for the next 18 years as a parent, because perhaps that's the perspective society gives you because of their dependence, physical and more, that becomes your perspective. That if you philosophize life, you are able to unbecome all that society cultivates you to be. And I think that's one of the many, many benefits of being able to philosophize in your life and navigating the journey of marriage and motherhood and all of, even friendships.
Yeah. No, that's so good. That's wonderful. And I do love this concept of like, when you say practice, it has an inherent um recognition of humility that is required, right? When you know it's a practice, you're realizing, oh, right, I'm always going to need to practice this. And there's never going to be a time where, oh, I just know how to be a husband, or I just know how to be a wife, or I just know how to be a mom. Like, no, I'm constantly practicing so that I can know in this new season, because, and that's the thing, motherhood and family dynamics like show you how seasons come and they go and they change. And it's just, I mean, just when you thought you kind of knew how you're sort of managing one thing, you learn another skill, or you learn your child is learning another skill that you're then working, they are evolving. And so, yeah, I think it's good in that way, because while habit has a similar, I mean, there can be something good in terms of creating habits for sure. And I always think about the relationship between the word habit and habitat, or you think about like, Marcus Aurelius and some of the Stoics and how they view habits. And I think there's something very good to that. But acknowledging the idea of practice is that humility of saying, I'm still learning. I'm still learning, and there's probably going to be something new that I may need to shift or do so that I can address and be sort of calibrated more to the present of what this actually is calling for me to do. Because see, habit will just be the hammer. It can be like, if we take, again, I said there's a lot of good to habit, but if we take habit as this fixed thing where sometimes we can actually use our habits as a hammer, we think that, well, that's like how I'm habituated, right? That's how I think about things. And I've been actually thinking about this as it relates to the concept of basically thinking that, yeah, the hammer of habit is in a sense, it's great because of its consistency. However, when you have the dynamicism of a family, yes, you need consistency, but you also need the ability to become more congruent with what is actually in the present moment or what is actually the case. And that means changing and shifting. And that can feel uncomfortable because our habits, like it worked for us. It was literally our habit was our habitat. It was what kept us safe, right? You know, people create certain patterns for a certain sense of safety or what worked. And then you're trying to move that into blending your blending because again when you become husband and wife and have a family, you in a sense die to yourself and give your life over to another person. They do the same, and now you're creating your own family, which will include habits that you both have had in your own past, but you're really kind of having to confront those habits for the first time and realize, oh, like you have different habits and we have to create a new habit and habitat for our children. And that's where this practicing comes up, right? Where there's also trial and error. There's also figuring out this works, this doesn't work so much. Maybe we need to change in this area. So I guess I'm just, yeah, I think that's interesting. And I do think, like, I'll be honest, I still have this feeling of like, I empathize with the sense of, well, let's just keep doing the habit because it worked for me, right? Like it worked enough, like it worked decently enough that why would we need to question that? And maybe that questioning could destabilize everything. And then what, you know, there's so much fear that can come in with that, you know. Anyway, yeah, I'm wondering what you think about that. Like in terms of, is it, you know, I'll show my cards. I do think we should rethink our habits. However, I also understand that like some habits are, again, what a person has known to work. So then if you say, well, okay, well, I had a different habit that worked, you know, well, maybe we should get more philosophical, right? Maybe this is where, like you're saying, philosophy comes in really handy because we say, what does it mean for something to function? Like, what does it mean that um, that worked in your life? Or how can we maybe get philosophical with maybe the way in which that was a habit in the first place, like in which, because sometimes we bias certain things, right? So we say it worked, but we may not look at the whole picture, right? Okay, it worked for this, but actually there were some areas that it was not always very useful for. And I do think that philosophy is really great for this. I've seen it happen and be very beneficial in my marriage, right? Where we can talk in this way where we actually start to suspend our judgment and we start to say, wait, there's probably more at play here. Like we can, it can be, you're right, it's a both and sort of thing. It's a yes, it's kind of like it's both correct and incorrect at the same time, which doesn't invalidate it. It's not a contradiction. It's more just like you're trying to acknowledge that our, again, our minds will see things in certain ways, especially if we're thinking about our own past, right? So that we can kind of create a sense of stability. That's what our brains do. That's what our primordial desire, our bodies and our primordial self do. So when you start to say, okay, well, actually, I think I can see how it worked in these areas, but these might be the drawbacks, and being able to actually, like, that's what's so beautiful to me about philosophy and practically how it relates to marriage is because you're not fighting over stuff because you're just so dogmatic about your both of your habitual lives that you've lived all your, you know, you know, whatever, it's usually about 2 decades until you get married or something like this. So yeah, and see, look, in the past when you didn't, and I'll just say this one last thing and then I want to hear your thoughts on this, but before pluralism, you know, there were a lot of givens. Okay, so people in their own, usually if you're in the same town, yes, there's going to be variation. Yes, there's going to be difference. But let's go back even further. If you've got sort of tribal mentalities about certain things, you wouldn't have this wouldn't come up as much because all of your habitation or habituation and habits were probably going to be pretty similar to your husband's. We're probably going to be pretty similar to the other person. But now we live in a global world. We've got people flying all over the place, and that's a wonderful thing. However, it means we need more skills. We need more philosophy to encounter the other and say, oh, I guess there is difference. You know, difference exists. And how are we going to do that when you've got real stakes like raising children? You know, like training them to be good human beings. Like that's a real, that feels, it's scary because you feel if I mess up, they might not be, you know what I mean? Like there's that fear of like, I want to do it right so that they're able to feel loved and be able to be a good human and understand order and, you know, all of the things that come with training children. But anyway, so I'm going to throw it back to you. I do think philosophy is more important than it ever has been and can help us in so many ways. But yeah, what are your thoughts, Sandy?
I think that was really good, Michelle. I'm really sort of thinking about habits because that's what we were sort
Mm-hmm.
of developing. So
Yeah.
individual habits and then two individuals coming together in a
Yeah.
union and sort of presenting those habits to each other. And I think, again, I feel like I'm very fixated on this host and hostage. You really put
Good.
this into my mind. I think habits and individual habits and then man and wife coming together and that union really creates a very transparent definition or sort of rather presentation of what it means to be a host or a hostage. And I think the crucial distinction here, and you'll have to help me because I'm thinking as I speak, will be consent. The repeated consent will be the access, or is rather the access of freedom in your marriage to grow and to develop and to philosophize. And I think it is, I mean, freedom is not the absence of obligation. It is the very being of being able to embrace obligation. And that's what marriage is. I mean, you chose each other, but you can also sort of have this approach where you look at the habits and you say, those habits have not been given to me by my spouse or my children, but they've been offered. Because, I mean, with the sacrament of marriage and coming together, I mean, obviously the union happens because you are open to the offerings of each other and your love, right? So I think that's naturally implied. And when that happens, and I think it's easier to cultivate habits if you consent to the ever-changing person and the freedom for that person to change, to understand you and to understand themselves as your spouse or your better half or whatever situation is. And I think that's where philosophy comes in, because if you don't very much understand that humans are ever so evolving, and if you aren't able to converse or articulate how you feel, and that's very much philosophy, the ability to have a creative expression in a way where you can maybe overcome your own fear or your own thoughts and express it to the other person. Because nobody, I mean, yes, individually we live in our minds, and that's one of our fatal flaws. We expect other people to read our minds, our intentions, our thoughts. And I think that's where a lot of habits can become toxic, because you get into the habit of having that conversation with the other person in your head and hoping it transfers to that person, but it isn't. And that's where conversations are like, I wish you had just asked, or I wish you had just told me so, or I wish you spoke about it, or I wish you said something, right? All those statements come from there. And I think those are habits. And, you know, you mentioned, you know, having different tribal experiences where you come from, socially, economically, ethnically. We live in a very globalized, cosmopolitan world, but there are certain things that have been passed down through our families. We've seen our parents' marriage, and that has passed on a certain idea of how we approach our spouse, or rather how they should be approached, right? Because there is a way that society thinks so and so should be approached, but is that approach correct for your family? Is that structure going to work for the person that you're married to? Perhaps not. And navigating that is important. And that's where philosophy can be a tool, because you've already acknowledged the very existence of differences. And that's what's really important. If I don't acknowledge your difference, I don't know how to approach you. But if I approach you in my head, then how are you wrong for not knowing how I feel? You know, but just, I think the point I'm trying to make is when we talk about habit, and we also mentioned safety. Let me make a point quickly about safety.
Yeah, please do.
I think it's safer to speak in our minds to ourselves than speak to the other individual. And this does not have to be your intimate spouse or your very close family relationships. This is like a very day-to-day thing. We live in a world, especially now with scrolling and texting, we don't have to be so raw and vulnerable in front of someone. We can just sort of text, hide behind a screen, write an email, or just sort of, I don't know, mute the conversation. But it becomes a problem when you do it in your very personal life, in your everyday life. If it's just like archived in your brain, and you've already had that fight in your head, and you've decided the other person's response is already this. That's you projecting your habits, your toxic habit of having a conversation in your head. That's projection of habit. That's not cultivating habits as two individuals. You know, I mean, I think that's where the distinction comes in with that's why it's a practice, because it means you show humility, where you acknowledge, I do have to do this every day to be better at it, and to become better at doing it. Both those things go hand in hand. And I think being able to acknowledge that in your marriage is really important, because again, it's a union of two people. If I have all these thoughts in my head, I can only begin to imagine what's going on in the other person's head. And philosophy is that
Yeah.
tool where you acknowledge, okay, we are two beings that are one, but we do have our own emotional and physical thoughts that need to be communicated in a way where it makes our union together a better one to be in.
Yeah.
So those are my thoughts about safety, habits. What else did we
Yeah.
talk about? About just cultivating habits. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's really good. And yeah, that it really stood out to me, this idea of like having to do it every day, right? Like this is why it is, in a sense, again, it's like it is a habituation or it's a habit, but it is this idea of like you're practicing it because it's not like, here's the thing, when it comes to practice, you're always realizing that you have to do this in order, like I'm thinking about violin right now. So I'm like doing the violin motion, but like I remember practicing for violin, and it was something that, it's it doesn't always sound great, you have to redo this, you have to redo that. And if we could think about conversation a bit more like that, where like we recognize, like, this is not a place to judge the fact that your Pachelbel's canon doesn't sound perfect right now. Like, it's the fact of the matter is you're trying to perfect it. It is a perfecting. So yes, it's going to actually get better. It will get better the more that you do this practice, and the ability to say, like, here are my thoughts. Now, I think the tricky thing may come when somebody feels like they're sharing their thoughts, and then you realize that it's almost like somebody speaking Chinese and somebody speaking French, right? Like there's a lot of communication happening, but it's almost like there's some sort of like little disconnect. I do think, though, that practicing would still help. Don't shy away from that. A lot of people just say, oh, we speak different languages, I'm just going to go back into my head, right? I'm just going to keep these thoughts back into my brain. That's actually where you need to do more practice, right? Where you say, wow, we are communicating. Something's not landing for you or for me. We might be speaking a bit of a different language here, and this is where we have all these microcultures in a pluralistic world, right? Even even in the same country, you'll get lots of difference. Um, so okay, and then you also have different generations. I was thinking about that like last night or this morning too. I don't know, like even a diplomatic approach or political approach, like containment versus engagement, right, with another nation. Like these are different approaches, and there have been in different times or like generations that may feel one's better than the other given what was politically happening, in the time, right? A World War II person's going to feel a certain way, and that's going to probably translate into how they raise their children, actually, because I don't think they're disconnected. Like often we get a framework, and that's what people are going to use because that's what they've known, and that's what worked, right? That's what worked, right? And so I'm not judging that. Like it's understandable where that comes from. But anyway, what I mean to say is, like, that's also this sort of recognition of like this movement through history, that we are in different historic moments, and we can both like respect and acknowledge and honor what has been before us and what is evolving now. And so, but again, this is like it's a very how do I say this? It requires that practice to come about. What's the language of your home? What's the tone of your home? What is it, the things that you desire for your family? What things have worked in both of your respective past, and how can you bring that together in some way there that you feel very much unified in that, But it's a practice, and I think that it's so easy to just think, again, if we don't allow ourselves to do that vulnerable work, then we end up just in our isolated habitat, right? Our habits up here, and we're not creating new, like, I guess this idea of creating new habits is when you start to get comfortable or creating a habit in the uncomfortable, right? I feel uncomfortable to say that because what if we just it's always going to be Chinese and French, right? But when you start doing more and more of that, you start learning each other's languages. And then what's so cool is that you may not like it, but this is the way it is. You start to learn, oh, wait, like I can actually ask. So say you have some, I don't know, we have a desire or need in marriage, okay? You have to start to learn how can you communicate that in such a way that lands with the person so they understand what you're asking for. And it seems like a tedious work, but it's an important one and a necessary one, because otherwise you just get constant, animosity, which is unfortunate, not a desirable thing. So I guess what I mean to say is, like, you start to learn the person's language, and then wow, you're fluent. Like you can access that communication very easily because you've now learned that language, and they're going to learn your language too. And I don't want to keep it just as different languages. I guess what will eventually come up in an analogy is your own language together. You're creating your own language as a couple. But if your native tongue is X or Y, like that's still in the background, it's still there. So we can't just dismiss it entirely and say, well, you should just know my language, or we should just magically have a new language together. No, it's going to be a practice. It's going to take time. It's going to take the vulnerability to show up and say, like, these are my thoughts. And for some reason that's maybe I'm articulating in a way that's not landing right now. However, I'm not going to give up. Like I won't, and not in a mean way. Just I'm going to keep showing up here as myself and as the thoughts I have. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe you could speak to like what you think could occur in that situation where somebody's like, well, I am trying to share my thoughts, because I think people think they're doing that. Like most people, even like it's sad. Unfortunately, there are a lot of unhappy marriages, unfortunately. And I do think that people always feel like they're trying to communicate. So, they're trying to share their thoughts, or they're trying to, and I don't know if it's just kind of like, this is where to me it goes back to the self-agency and this journaling and these practices of like cultivating your own self and your own practices, because I think a lot of times it may have to do with like you're not even clear what you're asking. Like you're ruminating too much on the things that have been done, but you're not giving like a precise action for the person to do. And so I think the more that one is able to cultivate, again, doing the stuff in yourself that you can control, so that when you do communicate, it's not all your journaling stuff that you just needed to work out yourself. It's not all your fears and worries. Like that's something, in a way, journaling for me is like you're bringing that to the divine. You're bringing it, you're spending time with God so that you are right with him or with God or the divine, whatever the concept that is for a person. And then you're going to go and be able to be in a right place to communicate with the other person, versus just spilling all of the stuff onto them. They may not be a verbal processor, and now you're kind of asking them to be your divine and make you feel better, and that's not their role. Like that is not their role. Their role, though, is to be able to co-labor with you and co-partner and co-create with you as a spouse. And you can do that when you have precise communication, when you have precise actions that you can take together. But again, having precise actions also means taking responsibility for what you want. Do you even know what you want? Do you have insecurities around wanting stuff? Maybe you feel like I shouldn't want this because I should just, or you're still, if you haven't cultivated your sense of self, you don't even know what you want. And again, like, have you ever asked yourself, what does an ideal look like for you in your head? And all of that, like, I think there's a lot that's cropped up around that where that feels wrong somehow. And there are reasons why maybe that happens. But anyway, that was a lot, Sandy, but I just wanted to like throw that to you. French, Chinese, how do people, like people who think they're trying to communicate, what do you think is happening there? And like, how do you think that if like there could be some ease and sort of like relief in that, so that people can actually feel like they're talking to each other?
Talking about languages, I think it's very interesting to use that analogy because I've always thought that we might communicate what we think we want to communicate, but someone
Mhm.
at the receiving end always hears what they want to hear.
That's like a huge lesson I learned from you years ago, Sandy, that I still remember and I still think about that. And like, it's so, I've seen it to be true again and again and again. But anyways, continue. Yeah.
And I think it's like it also depends on the nature of the conversation or what's being discussed. Are you coming from a place of defense or of offense?
Mm,
And
mm,
that sort of sets the tone for the conversation, whether it's one that's amiable or one that's, has a little bit of animosity or resentment or built up tension or whatever it is. And I think the barrier in the language comes from there because one musters all the courage or perhaps finally decides things that, oh, I think I finally know what I want to say and I think I'm going to get across. And then it is not received well. You speak French, they speak
mm.
Chinese. And
Chinese.
what at the moment you feel that way because just because I think it's because it has finally clicked in your head that this is a situation that needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
expect that immediate urgency from the other person
Yes.
to
Hmm.
grasp the situation. And that's where the
Yes.
language barrier comes
Mm,
because
mm, mm.
you've had time to sort of ruminate or think or fear the outcome of, or even think of all the possibilities this conversation would have in the end,
Mhm,
but the other
mhm.
person on
Yeah.
the receiving end does not. So
Yeah.
there is an
It's
element
completely
of
new for
being
them.
caught or off guard. I think that urgency, I'm so sorry about that.
Don't
Um,
worry about it. Don't
I
worry at
think
all.
it's really the urgency of everything. One person's had time to navigate it, the other
Mm,
person
mhm,
hasn't. And I think that really creates the language barrier. So
mm.
Chinese, French,
Yeah.
that's where it is. And it is that drastic. You feel like you're from two different continents. It's like, are you even seeing the situation as I am? Well, I'm not,
Yeah.
frankly, because I haven't had the time to. Or perhaps
Yeah.
I didn't see the situation the way you did. And I think that's where philosophy comes in handy, where you were
Mm,
able to navigate and acknowledge, okay, this is where I am. This is A, and B is receiving it in a certain way, not because it does not want to understand A, it does not
Mm-hmm.
have the time to understand
Mm-hmm.
A in the same urgency, because you're not in the
Mm-hmm.
same place in your thoughts.
Yeah, that's
It
good.
could be a new thought, the B, but it's been a thought that's been lingering for a long time in A. And I think that's where the whole cultivating a practice where you acknowledge, okay. But I think what B could do in this case is sort of we can learn patterns and traits and habits that allow us to sort of guess how a reaction might be, or rather how this person is. And that's what marriage is. You kind of pick
Yeah.
up on all the things that you know about the individual, and you're like, okay, this is the kind of person he is or she is.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
helps you decide how you want to approach something. But that takes practice and time. And that's why marriage
Mm.
is ever so evolving, you know,
Yeah.
and that's why it takes a long time. And that's why a lasting marriage is a successful marriage, right? Because you
Yeah.
practice every day to make it last. It's not implied just because it lasted 15 years. It's not going to last the next 15 if you haven't sort of come together
Mm.
and, you know, deciphered your collective pasts with your collective, you know, individual now one union individual present, because you are one individual. And that's
Mhm.
very interesting because even though we call it that, we're really not. We're very, very different people, even though we are seen to be bone to bone, flesh to flesh, one person in the sacrament of marriage. Philosophy helps you identify that we are two different heads.
Yeah.
And we're in
And
two
that
different places, even if we physically share one habitat, we can be in two different places mentally. And
mm,
that sense of awareness only comes with being able to use philosophy.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and even the philosophical idea of like, that I remember you saying, like, you'll say something to somebody and they'll probably just interpret it the way that they're going to interpret it. Like, you can try and edit and make it like as much. And I do think there's a place for like, editing and curating how you're going to say something to somebody else. But even recognizing that, like, okay, when I hear something, I'm already just going to bias whatever my interpretation is when I hear that. Um, is a philosophical concept which you can use to then say, okay, I'm going to slow down and realize here's how I interpret it. You've got an interpretation too. What's yours? And this is tremendously helpful because it's realizing that, like, oh yeah, like, okay, but when we start to become more familiar with these different interpretations, we can start to realize, oh, I see, like, I can see how you may have taken it that way. Like, there's so much more empathy and understanding for one another in that place. And yeah, I mean, it's a simple idea, but it's really huge and important when you can start to apply it to communication. Um, yeah, because I think that, and the thing is, a lot of people don't do this, so that's why you kind of start from the place of they're going to interpret it their way, the way they do. How do you say it, Sandy? It's like whatever you say, the person's just going to take it the way that they want to take it, basically.
Yeah. You put me on the spot now. I mean, I always think that we can communicate what we want to, but the other person always hears what they want to hear.
That's it. That's it. Yeah.
It's just natural human instinct. I mean,
Hmm.
we
Hmm.
are conditioned to our physical, historical circumstances,
Hmm.
and we
Hmm.
navigate. Our first response is how do we relate? We come from a point of relation, not intention. It's
Yeah.
relation first, and then intention, and then you sort of navigate the other person. So yeah, that's what I
Hmm.
think. And just
Yeah,
knowing that is philosophical. Just
it is.
knowing that that's being aware. That's being self-aware, and that
Exactly.
itself like does not create any room for unnecessary animosity or resentment or disappointment. It's
Exactly.
like you don't get me. Like that doesn't happen because you already know
Hmm.
it's going to be received in a different way first, and then we're going to have to
Exactly.
do this again. Pause it, come back, pick it up, and
Yes.
then or whatever you're
Exactly.
doing at the time and like revisit it maybe once or twice more for it to finally click in a way where it works for both of us.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's so good. That's so good. And again, this is why I'm always thinking, like, to me, it always feels incredibly practical. Speaking about practice, it's always very practical in my mind to do philosophy because it's not merely like, yes, go read the books, go read Plato, go read Hegel. But what's Plato asking? Like, he's asking about what does it mean to live the good life? he's not saying that philosophy is to have read a certain amount of, names that you can name drop about, no,
Mhm.
go and read the books, like do it. It's very important in the cultivation of thought. But really, philosophy is not some subject relegated to, ivory towers or something like that. Philosophy, and look, like we see this all the time in the consumer world where brands have philosophies. Okay, so brands have philosophies. Okay, they have a philosophy. It's obviously something that's actually much more quotidian. And actually, having like brands, I've been thinking about this too, where if a brand has a philosophy, like families do have a philosophy, whether they acknowledge it or not. Like it's there, it's operating under the surface, even if that philosophy is we don't have one or we're not going to have one. That's still, it kind of always gets subsumed into the fact that there is a philosophy at play. And so that's why for me, it seems really important to actually become conscious and aware of it. Like you're saying, this awareness piece, because then you can start to actually like, oh, I see. Like I'm, you're not just operating out of basically the shadow philosophy that's controlling everything and your inability to communicate. Well, it's enable, but really there's a lot of ability in inability because you start to realize, okay, I see. Like it's not merely that this is not working, it's that this is actually a great gift because you get to cultivate a new skill, you get to cultivate further in yourself to be able to do that. But again, this is where philosophy is going to come in really important, because you will hit a wall without philosophy. Like how do you go past that impasse if you have experientially felt like communication didn't work, right? And this is how, unfortunately, it can feel for a lot of people in marriage, where they feel like they've tried to communicate. They feel like they try to talk to the other person. The other person feels the same way. That's an impasse. Now what? Like what tools do you have at that point besides like, and so that's where philosophy comes in and says, like, all the stuff we've been saying, right? You guys have different interpretations of what's being said. You guys may be speaking different languages and need to learn each other's languages. You may need to cultivate a new language with one another. You may need to realize that you guys have patterns from your past that inform the way that you interpret what's being said. Maybe you actually are ruminating too much on what has happened instead of like communicating precise action for what could happen, like what's possible for us as a couple. That's exciting. Like that's where there's so much excitement that can be brought into the conversation, and even the phenomenology of being with that other human being when you have like when you have tools. Like it's not hope. Like that's the thing for me. It's like philosophy equals hope. There's a lot of hope in philosophy because it gives you a capacity and a means by which to deal with what usually would be a wall. You're just hitting into a wall. Philosophy is like, hey, you can climb this wall. Hey, did you notice there's a way around over here? Oh, hey, did you notice there's some pegs on the ground you could, I don't know, put in the wall. I'm just getting creative here, but you see what I'm saying? Like it gives you options, and it realizes that like, oh wait, let's zoom out. And the wall was actually this big. Like it was literally just, if you're so pigeonholed, you just hit the wall and think that's it. But if you just zoom out just a little bit, you're like, oh my gosh, this wall was nothing. Like it was a pillar and I can go around it on either side. I'm just saying potentially, sure, maybe it's a really, really long wall and you can't, it will be harder to pass, but at least there's it puts things like you're saying, the perspective. It shifts your perspective to realize that actually there might be a different vantage point in which I could look at this and see that what I'm calling an obstacle is actually the way. Like that is the mechanism. Maybe it's actually a bridge over water, not a wall, but if you're seeing it from so low down, you just think it's like a wall. So anyways, I think this is why philosophy is so helpful and why it relates to everyday life, to marriage, to motherhood, to work life, to your relations with your colleagues, to how you relate to yourself, because it gives these tools. It equips people to start to get curious, and it's not in that way. It's not like over anyone's head, because I think that's really one last thing I'll say really quick. I do think people often think of philosophy as like, oh well, that's for those people, or like that's like way over my head, or I don't know if I understand that. This is like, no, you are literally doing philosophy anyway, honey. Like just get real with yourself. Like you are doing this. You have a philosophy. You're just not conscious of it. You're just not thinking that you do. And so when you start to realize it's not just in the stuffy old bookshelves or something, even though I love the bookshelves, you know that, but it's like it's really just part of everyday life, then I think that it would really, really equip so many people who desperately need hope, like really just need hope. They really need hope, and they need the tools and the ability to do that. And the tools are simple. It's like start journaling, start asking yourself questions to yourself. This isn't anything like Yeah, I don't know. It's to me, it's like it's simple things that are so powerful, but why it can be so easily overlooked, and why sometimes philosophy kind of makes people feel like, well, they can't access that. No, they can absolutely access that. They absolutely can. If you're a human being with a thinking mind, which you are, then you can do this. Like you can do this. So anyway, yeah.
Totally agree. I do believe that philosophy can ultimately, in a single word, be defined as freedom.
Hmm.
I believe, I truly believe that philosophy really helps you examine your life. And I
Hmm.
mean, it's famously said, an unexamined life is not a life worth living. And that's the
Yeah.
truth of it. I
Hmm.
think philosophy really is the freedom to gain that self-awareness you need to be intentional in your day-to-day lives, whether it's your marriage, your relationships, your friendships, your children. And I think that's where, and having given that sort of mental, both perhaps, consent towards that freedom to acknowledge, like you said, that that wall is perhaps not that big. Again, this
Hmm.
goes back to the point about us living in our head, because everything's really big in our heads, but it's really
Yeah.
not. It's a storm in a teacup, if you think about it. And
Yeah.
hindsight is 2020, right? All that was just huge in my head. It was really
Hmm.
not going to be a
Hmm.
big deal if we didn't navigate it. And I think philosophy is that tool that lets you use that freedom to enhance your life and your relationship and your marriage. And I think it's really important. Like you said, people don't realize that we philosophize every single day. But again, that's perspective. Like I said, the life you live is the art you create. And that's where the whole notion of, your children are your legacy, the way you live your life is a testament to, all that's good, true, and beautiful, if that's what you seek. And philosophy really allows you to live with that awareness of your present situation and to realize that this is ever so evolving, like our thoughts. Because what
Hmm.
I'm thinking today is twice the size of what it was yesterday, but it's really small compared to tomorrow.
Yeah.
And just knowing that gives me comfort because I know
Hmm.
tomorrow in some way I'm going to do better in one area of life and start trying to do better in another area. But just being able
Hmm.
to, like you said, bring it back to hope. It makes you
Hmm.
hopeful.
It
It
does.
gives you hope to know that
Hmm.
that awareness will create a sense of peace and understanding and curiosity to see what's true and beautiful and to be able to create something that
Yeah.
is meaningful within the marriage, within your children, to relate that to motherhood. I think it's very biological if you take philosophy out of it. You're the physical host, and there is this sense of
Mm.
being captured by it. But I think in order to understand the divinity that lies within motherhood, you need to be able to philosophize to see that it is a very sacred vocation. It's a
Mm.
calling. It's being offered to you. It's not just being given because
Mm.
it's a blessing. And to be able to see that, and I don't mean this in a way where everything in our life, every aspect needs to be glamorized, but it even makes suffering worth it because suffering builds character, right? There is something stoic, it is stoic. I mean, we know that, but it's because people have been able to philosophize their suffering. And I think with motherhood, I always call it like it's a journey of joyful chaos. They go together. But to be able to
Absolutely.
know that they coexist
Yeah.
is because of philosophy. It's because of my ability to see it as not just a biological job, but as a calling, as a vocation, as something that has been entrusted to me, that has been given to me. I'm not captured by it or imprisoned by it. And I
Mm.
think in a world where there is a lot of things that is happening that probably isn't correct or is very wrong or brutal, I think it helps you make peace and be hopeful about the future if you are able to have that understanding or use it as a tool every single day in any way possible. And I think it's also a habit. I think philosophy can also be a habit that can be cultivated through practice. You have to do it every day, whether it's writing or journaling
Yeah.
or
Breathing.
creativity or singing or dancing. It is a way of expression. And
Yeah.
expression is good. Suppression isn't. Suppression creates chaos. Suppression leads to oppression of mind too. The
Mm.
words are
Mm.
flowing.
I
Sorry.
know. I love it. I love it.
Yeah. I think
I'm
suppression
here
and
for it.
oppression go hand in hand. And I
Mm.
think it leads me back to my point. So philosophy, therefore, is freedom because it helps you overcome both those things. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. That's so good, Sandy. I love that. And I do think this point about the biology, like I've also been thinking about shifting perspective to, there's kind of this mainstream idea of like almost being, you know, like where a mother feels like I'm just the constant need for you, and that feeling more like a hostage situation versus like, isn't that, couldn't we flip that in our minds to be like, wow, like I'm actually needed, I'm required, and I'm the one feeding babies, and I'm the one doing this, like I it's not like in an egoic sense, it's just to recognize this offered role, right, this offered gift of being able to do this, which will include both suffering and joy. But it's like, if you see it in that way, it's so abundant. It's like, yes, I'm feeding, I'm taking care, I'm doing this. And it's like, I get to do that. I have a needed role. And I do think that in our day and age, especially with the technological essence, we need, like, I see it. I see how children come alive when they are needed. They're doing something that like they are being required or called to do. Like they light up when they have a responsibility, right? When they get to do whatever it is, it's some task or some shoveling or some this or that or the other. Like they actually come quite alive when they know that, oh, I can do this and I'm doing this. And it's an enlivening thing, but we've got such a sedentary, you know, technological essence that takes over everything, that does everything for us. And then we realize that, like, we think that, oh well, that'll be inconvenient or something like this, but really, um, the thing that's amazing is when we can, like, and I always love this word play, the inconvenient or the convenience versus convening. Like our society like leans toward this convenience, right? But what we trade out for that and what we lose, and that's which is very sad and costly, is that we lose convening. We lose convening with our capacity. We lose convening with ourselves and our relations. And a lot of technology takes people away from convening, because it's just this kind of self-relating negativity, whether it's on a phone or whatever it is, instead of like using our bodies and our capacity biologically to see that as actually us hosting reality, us hosting our responsibilities in the world, and making it a better place, even just by doing small little tasks or small responsibilities that we see is a part of something that is necessary and needed. So anyway, I just wanted to speak to that concept really quick too on the biology. But yeah, I love that, and I love the word flow you had there, Sandy. Very, very, very good. That's very, very good.
Yeah, I think I'll make one last point before we call today.
Yes, yes.
Being physically needed in motherhood, I think I had this sort of realization with my husband one of these days, where my son's been going through a phase where he's being very clingy, like my immediate absence, or if I go down a different flight of stairs or go upstairs, he would cry at the bottom of the stairs seeking me. And as soon as he sees me, he lights up and he'll like be so happy, like she's back, she hasn't left. I think that seeing that as being needed and seeing that as power, that only you have the ability in this world to make this child feel safe and happy and finally joyful. I think that perspective really helps versus feeling, oh my goodness, like you're being really clingy. Well, that is true. That is true. They are going through a phase where they're clinging and learning separation anxiety and navigating all those milestones. I think perspective, I'm trying to relate this back to philosophizing life. I think that perspective of seeing that as, oh, only I am this immense source of comfort versus this is like super clingy, why is this happening, I just need 10 seconds to breathe. While both those things are true, it allows philosophy allows you to understand that, again, this is not a moment of being held hostage. This is ever so evolving. These are very fleeting moments. They're not always going to need you like this. The days are long, but the years are short. And again, this is the awareness that philosophy brings, to see that I am this empowered being. Only I have the power to light up their eyes like this in this world. And that is sacred, that is virtuous, that is beautiful. And beautiful things also cause suffering naturally. That is how the world works. And they do. And that's what motherhood is. It's a very beautiful, divine way of suffering. Not to put it negatively, but it's one way of describing it, because both of it exist together and it's still so breathtaking and beautiful. That having that perspective really helps. And again, knowing that, perhaps giving them that responsibility and being able to acknowledge that difference is philosophy. So you are
Mhm.
doing philosophy. Like, wow, that responsibility made them feel seen, valid,
Yes, exactly.
helpful,
Yes.
useful, grown up, because kids want to grow up,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Even in their
Yeah.
childlike ways, they want to grow
Mhm.
up. And they're like, oh, I did something, I contributed. That
Mhm.
contribution is made meaningful through philosophy because as a parent, we're able to acknowledge that, oh, they tried. And sometimes they might not be successful and you'll have to clean up the mess or do it again. But for them, that is a victory because
Exactly.
I was able to do that or I was allowed to do that.
Yeah,
And to be
exactly.
able to do that without being resentful or thinking, oh, you just added to my 10,000 chores. Well, that could also be true, right? Two things can be true at once.
Exactly.
To understand
Exactly.
two things can be true at once, and to be able to understand that paradox is philosophy.
100%.
Yeah.
Yes, I couldn't have said it better, Sandy. My dear, thank you so, so much.
Thank you
We
so
could
much for having me.
very fruitful for me. Thanks, Sandy. I really
Yes,
enjoyed it so
as
much. Thank you
always,
for
you
your
inspire
time.
my word flows and everything, as always.
Yay!
Thanks so
Good.
much. Have a great
Well,
day and give my
you
best
too,
to
darling.
Daniel,
I
please.
will give my best to Alex and the fam, okay?
I will. Thank
Bye,
you.
darling.